men stepping into their erotic leadership in a healthy way actually helps them master this idea of attunement so that they know how to flow with life. They know how to flow with their partners. They're not shook by obstacles that come into their path. They're able to adjust and make creative solutions in how they can meet each sort of obstacle or challenge that comes through their path. Having that attunement with self and others is a really amazing tool that men can acquire once they become erotic leaders.
Part of why we're having this conversation is we want to have this conversation more to expose what it could look like to help. Because I think most people, and you can speak to this better than I can, but I think most people probably have little kinks in their lives that they wish they could share, or they wish they could explore, but it's so taboo. It's shut down by society. We've been told since day one that if you share that with somebody else, they're going to leave you because they're going to think you're crazy and or a freak or whatever word you want to use, right? So we've had this negative connotation with it. But I think most people have a little bit of that, and they may not be super like you put it perfectly always when you speak, is that like kink, it looks different to everybody, right?
Totally. Absolutely. A definition for kinky that Jaya Ma uses, she's the creator of the Erotic Blueprints, is essentially someone who's turned on by the taboo or something that feels a little naughty. And may not even be you personally. It might be what society or your cultural background or your religious background considers to be taboo or naughty, etc. So it's very common for people to think of things that aren't necessarily something they'd easily talk about to just anyone, right? And it doesn't even necessarily have to be these whips and chains and these like really extreme images. It can be something really simple like dirty talk or the way you're being touched or doggy style. Everybody has their own sort of levels of taboo or naughtiness, but it's that aspect of taboo that creates the thrill. It creates that electricity, that juice. So instead of disowning that part of ourselves or exiling that part of ourselves that usually is attached to a lot of shame, if we could actually embrace that and use it to uplift us and empower us, then, you have so much possibility in what you can explore from that place,
Yeah. Oh, so good.
Yeah.
Well, I want to dive we're at the art of masculinity. So we want to hit on the masculine part of this. And there's a couple routes that I want to take. And I want to start with the first route, which is, you mentioned the shame.
Yeah.
And we've already talked a little bit about how there's kind of like, I believe, this underlying form of whatever, kink or satiation that's not being filled, right? For a lot of people, for most people, but I think men in general, because there's even a higher level of shame for men to want to explore any form of like kink, or maybe even admit that they're a follower or a sub potentially, right? So let's talk a little bit about that and what you've seen in your experience with men and how that could potentially really open up their lives for so much pleasure and joy.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So for men, especially, there's whether you're interested in being the leader or follower, and I just want to touch on that a little bit because that's
absolutely.
a terminology that a lot of people don't know. So as a lot of people have heard in the kink or BDSM lifestyle, there's like these different roles that people can take on, like dominant and submissive, top, bottom, sadist, masochist, etc. I use a more blanket term, a bigger umbrella to sort of convey these different polarities. So I use leader and follower. And I use that terminology because it's more collaborative than dom sub, which is more hierarchical. So when I talk about leader and follower, there's this collaboration between people to create something special. It could be that you think of the erotic as a dance almost. So in partner dancing, there's always a leader and there's always a follower, but both can be masterful. Both are needed to have the dance and both can create something really beautiful together. So when we step away from this limiting thinking around what it has to look like if I'm a man and I'm interested in feeling what it's like to be in surrender, like what does it actually feel like to feel like I can just exist and not actually have to do all the time in order to have value. I think that's a trap that a lot of men fall into, is this idea of like, if I'm not like bringing something to the table, then what is my purpose? What is my value? But what if it was safe enough to be with the partner that's like, hey, I would love for you to feel what it's like to surrender and to know that you're worthy of receiving pleasure and expansion just by breathing, and instead of saying like, get on your knees, bitch, like not all men are like available for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I know a lot of women who are really interested in stepping into their leadership in the bedroom with their male partner and want to do it in a way that's really loving and respectful and doesn't necessarily have to be this degrading experience unless that's what they're looking for.
Yeah.
So it just creates some availability around what an energy exchange can look like, because that's basically all that's happening, is that energy is being exchanged one way or another.
Mm-hmm.
I've also noticed people who are more evolved in their life path and their journey, and the more healing they've done, the less fixated they are on like what that energy exchange has to look like. So for a man who maybe hasn't had a lot of healing and hasn't had a lot of that integration of self, he might be very like strict on like, I would never be submissive. There's no fucking way I would let a woman dom me.
Yeah.
Like I would never do that to myself. And I'm like, well, but you want your partner to do that for you? Like, do you hear the judgment that you hold with that sort of, right. So that judgment and that sort of idea of what submissive means carries into that relationship that he has with his partner. And it's almost a sense where there's a codependency that can happen energetically, where I need you to be submissive to me so I can feel powerful.
Yeah.
And if you don't, then what, like, I don't know what to do with
am
my,
I? Like what kind of man am I?
Exactly. But if I know inherently that I am powerful, I am worthy, I am, I am connected deeply to myself, I'm grounded in my understanding of myself, then I don't need you to fill that void. I fill it to myself, but you can compliment me and I can compliment you. So instead of us spending this energy and filling each other up where we're empty, we come into an agreement where we're full. And instead we're just elevating, like, and then we could do this, and then we could do that, and then we could do, fireworks when we actually have that understanding of self. So whether you step into the follower role or the leader role, you are really trusting of self and that you are able to surrender and you are able to experience the depth of what's possible instead of the surface level bullshit that people tend to stick to because it feels safe. When I ask a man, like, what does being a dominant mean to you? He says, to be in control.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, what does that mean though? Like control is like such an interesting word. And when I hear something about control, I think about like, I need to control something because I don't trust it.
Yeah.
I feel like it's coming from a place of fear. But if I understand that I have access to my own energy where I can influence another person's energy, Abraham Hicks has said, there's a quote that Abraham Hicks said that he who understands their own energy and knows how to control it and influence it can also do that for another person. And that's real power is being able to have that sense of self and to be able to really be so deeply connected to your inner landscape that you're able to influence another person and be their mirror and actually invite them into having an experience instead of pushing, dragging, and pulling them into something instead. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And what's really powerful about that is like you're challenging the internal world of the individual. So in there, it's like that is the power and control. If you have the power and control internally, that's where the confidence comes from. And externally, you can explore and play with different roles and different ways of like existing and experiencing pleasure, where because the fact that you do own who you are internally, right?
Totally.
And so
it's interesting, I do a class called Dom Mastery where people are, learning. Yes, that's right. They're stepping into their erotic leadership. And I've created the 10 principles of erotic leadership. And over the last 20 years, I started to feel into what are these pillars and what are these qualities of true, healthy, leadership in that erotic space. And things include like presence and accountability and heart and surrender and congruence. And, some of these phrases, people are like, what do you mean surrender? Like, why would surrender be a part of this erotic leadership principle? And it's like, well, if you are unwaveringly trusting of yourself, then you're able to access surrender. We think about, it's so important in kink to have an understanding of like, what are we available for and what are we not available for? So there's some foundational things that need to happen when I'm in maybe in a partnership with someone that I want to learn like how to meet them erotically. However, as you continue to dive deeper and deeper into these spaces, you start to realize that I don't actually need all these rules and all of these boundaries and things because I actually am so clear on how I trust myself that I'm only going to attract scenarios and experiences that are going to fulfill me anyway. So I don't actually have to protect myself. I don't actually have to tell you, Johnny, like, don't do this, don't do that, because I already know when I'm actually really connected to myself that I'm only going to call in the things that I want the most. And then we can just sort of have no holds bars sort of exploration where we can just really expand to deeper places. I think a lot of people focus on building the foundation, but when you build a foundation, then you're supposed to build the house on top of it. Yeah. And sometimes people just lean on the foundation instead of actually building something magical from it. So the idea of Dom mastery is like, how do I build a foundation that I can actually build on top of that's going to be just really mind-blowing and expansive and basically everything that I want it to be, because the Dom is the artist at the end of the day. So be the artist of your life, be the Dom of your life. Yeah, self-mastery.
Yeah, and what's also powerful about it is that it translates externally to the bedroom. It's like it's like, you know, what you're teaching isn't just leadership for the bedroom or leadership and confidence for the bedroom. It's like literally outside of that too. The amount of confidence. And that's the next question I had for you is like, when you've done a lot of work with men and you've done it through this practice, how have you seen, because I'm sure you're friends with some of them still, or you have been in the past and you know them more on a personal level, also outside of that client relationship. How have you seen them in life after doing that practice?
So I had noticed, I do a lot of play parties, and I had noticed, especially with heterosexual couples or just heterosexual pairs where there was a man and there was a woman, I had noticed something really interesting happening energetically. So I had noticed that a lot of the time, the man was very connected to his desires and what he wanted, but he was not very attuned to his female partner. And it was the opposite for women. The women were very attuned to the man and feeling him, but were very disconnected to actually what they wanted and their own desire. So there was a way that they kind of kept missing themselves. Yeah. So when I'm working with men, I'm really talking about this erotic intelligence that bleeds into erotic attunement. Like when you are able to be really connected to yourself and then also attuned to the person next to you or across from you, then it gives you an understanding of how to be with them. So when you master this idea of attunement, that no matter who I come into contact with, I'm able to flow with them, I'm able to be with them, I'm able to meet them in a way that feels good for both of us. Having that sort of mastery in the rest of your life creates endless possibilities of what you can create, you know, because we live in a world where, you know, your relationships are very important and your success and your joy and your happiness. So if you're able to have that attunement on an erotic level, that which is basically the most sensitive place that you can have that attunement, and then you ripple it into the rest of your life where it's actually easier to just meet people. You know, if you're getting a coffee and you meet the barista and you're having a meeting with your boss or all those other things, all of that's a piece of cake once you've mastered the actual core of everything, which is the erotic self, which is the sexual self. So men stepping into their erotic leadership in a healthy way actually helps them master this idea of attunement so that they know how to flow with life. They know how to flow with their partners. They're not shook by obstacles that come into their path. They're able to adjust and make creative solutions and how they can meet each sort of obstacle or challenge that comes through their path, whether it's their wife or whether it's their boss, you know what I mean? So like, having that attunement with self and others is a really amazing tool that men can acquire once they become erotic leaders.
Yeah. And I would add to that is that like you're teaching them how to tap into almost that energetic state. So it's not, the communication isn't just verbal and physical, it's that energetic communication as well, correct?
Absolutely. You know, the thing with men, which I love, is that they tend to, if they're going to be dominant, they tend to really fall on their physical strength, you know, and and as a woman dominant, that is not something I have access to. I wish I did. But that is definitely not the fallback for me when it comes to me being in erotic leadership. So it's my desire to show men that while that's a great asset to have and it's great if you can utilize it, what else is there? Because, you know, just being a strong monkey and throwing your girl over your shoulder, it can be good for certain levels. But like, what if you're not in the same room with each other? Or like, how do you still assert that dominance in a really healthy way that, you know, blows her fucking mind open and all other parts of her body open? That doesn't always have to fall on you having to be in the room and like being physical in that sense. So how do you attune to someone mentally? How do you attune to them emotionally? How do you attune to them spiritually? Being able to hit all of those different sort of aspects of being a human being is so more powerful than just being able to, club a girl over the head and drag her by the hair into your cave.
You come with me.
Yeah, exactly. But I was I was giving guys a hard time about it because I'm like, is that all you got? Like this physical strength thing? That's so basic and first level. And then I was playing with a partner, a man, and he sort of like threw me over his shoulder, and I was like, woohoo! Yeah. But he also brought in these other aspects as well.
Sure.
That he was really able to use erotic language to really stimulate my brain. Like I'm a sapiosexual, so I have to feel like the person I'm engaging with is, up to my speed intelligently, and is able to use language and stimulate my imagination in ways that like really sets my body on fire, as well as the way he touches me and the way he is present with me and all of those things as well.
Yeah. And you just hit on so many important things there to include, like you said, the way that we touch, but then also the way that we speak intellectually to have that. Again, it's almost like when I was, working, when Taylor and I went to your event and we were working with you, and there's different levels of touching that you can get that touch different senses within us, right? Yeah. So that's that soft, and the guys that are just going for brute power, it's like you're not going to have the versatility in that. And in that exposure of versatility and breadth of range, you're able to have that deeper connection with your partner. And that's where I think a lot of men, and to myself included, even before, I met you and before Taylor and I started to explore more, I was of the same mindset. I was like, oh, come with me. I grab, we go. Like, It's just like, I didn't know. And what you don't know, you don't know. So to be exposed to this different style, but also with this range now allows me to connect with Taylor better, but then also allows me to speak to her in different ways and meet her at different levels when she's not open for certain things, like you said. So,
oh, I love that. I love hearing that, because there is such a wide range of what's possible, but we're sort of taught such a limited idea of it. Like, we look at the media and the sensationalized view of what kink is. So people think it's, like, I don't want to hurt my partner. A lot of guys don't, like, they get afraid of like hurting their partner or creating any damage and things like that. So another thing we talk about in Dom Mastery and in the classes that I do is this idea of like having the language that you and your partner can have a better understanding of each other. Because this idea of like, if I'm the Dom, I'm this like godlike perfect being, like that is just not realistic. So people want to actually feel your humanity. They actually want to feel like they're impacting you. A lot of the men I meet who assume the dominant position actually, it feels like they almost leave their heart out of it, and they come in with this very stoic like sense of like, I'm in charge now, so do this, do that, and it's actually like really devoid of the heart and this different levels of connection that's possible. So I love that you can learn that there's so many different options. Like as the artist, you have so many different ways of creating and thinking about like, what is the intention at the end of the day? The difference between regular kink and conscious kink is having intention. So an intention could just be a lot of pleasure, but it could also like help your female partner to open her heart more, to like have her be in her body more, to remind her of her beauty and like, happy wife, happy life. Like you want to create an opportunity where your partner can feel themselves more, create safety. It can actually like, rewrite some of these really old belief systems we have about what love is and what partnership is and what the world is even. When we are able to have a really positive erotic experience with another person, it actually, rewires our brains as well, the synapses, and change can only really fundamentally happen in connection with another. It doesn't really happen in a vacuum. It doesn't happen just by reading a book. You can get inspired by a book and it can really open your mind, but real long-lasting integrated change happens through relationships and through connection. Just like a lot of our trauma happens in connection, our healing needs to happen in connection as well. So you can actually like help heal your partner, because essentially if you're in a relationship with someone, you are basically their parental figure that they need to have healing with anyway. You sort of stepped into that role, like with Taylor and her with you, whatever unresolved pain or trauma or healing that needs to happen in your family dynamics, your partner's actually stepping into that role to actually support you in that journey. So if you can experience something erotically that's pleasure filled while you're on that healing journey with each other, it just makes everything so much more fun, I think.